So you've heard about Flesh and Blood and you've thought about trying it, but you're not really sure if it's worth the time, energy, and money. Whether you play other games or are completely new to TCGs, there are a whole bunch of worries to have when jumping into a new hobby. And so in today's video, I want to go over the common concerns that people have about playing Flesh and Blood. Now, I want to say up front, I am a Flesh and Blood fanatic and you are watching a Flesh and Blood channel, meaning I'm obviously a little bit biased. However, I want to give you both the pros and cons about the game so you can make the best decision for yourself as to whether you want to play Flesh and Blood or not. So without any further ado, let's first discuss whether the game is fun and balanced. Over the past 16 years, I have played Yu-Gi-Oh!, Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, Force of Will, which is just anime magic, and Flesh and Blood. Out of those 5, I can very confidently say that Flesh and Blood is the best game that I have ever played. Over the years, these other games have become more and more variance-based. It's very easy to lose just because you didn't draw a good hand and your opponent did. There's also the sheer power creep that these games have faced simply because they've existed for so long. This leads to very swingy games where usually one person gets completely blown out of the water. Now, Flesh and Blood does have some heroes that can kill you in a couple of turns or out of nowhere. You basically have to start with a god hand and get very lucky with the next several cards on the top of your deck in order to do so. Not only is it difficult to just pop off, but with both players drawing up to their full hand size at the end of their own turns, and every card being a resource and a block, Flesh and Blood truly minimizes the variance that makes games unfun. And this leads into the balance of the metagame, which at the moment is incredible. Right now, we are in a very wide open meta with many viable hero choices. Now, yes, there are some heroes that are the best and then other heroes that are, well, Azalea, but this exists in every single game. But because Flesh and Blood has less variance than in other games, it allows players to either pick the best deck or put time and effort into their favorite hero and get really good at piloting that one deck. That being said, the game has seen its share of dominated formats where one hero is just better than the rest. Ever since then, we've been good, but I do expect that somewhere along the line, mistakes will be made and we probably will see another format where one hero is dominating, especially because Flesh and Blood doesn't have set rotations. But this is something that happens in every game, and LSS has been pretty quick with dealing with their mistakes. So while not perfect, Flesh and Blood is an incredibly fun and balanced game with usually a wide diversity of playable decks. Moving on to the second aspect of the game, we have affordability and accessibility. One thing that you may have heard about Flesh and Blood is that it's an incredibly expensive game, which isn't true, or at least it's no more expensive than games like Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh! Most cards in Flesh and Blood are actually pretty cheap, with most of the price being allocated to a few staple Majestics, legendary equipment, and the Fabled cards. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go in too much detail here as I do have another video specifically on this topic, so I'll link it in the description if you want to go check that out for more information. And while you're scrolling down there, feel free to be a Chad and slap that subscribe button. Now, I can very much understand not wanting to spend $80 to $150 on a single trading card for a game that you're just looking to get into, which is why it's good that you don't have to do that. For the equipment, there are tons of different options at lower rarities. Some heroes do have legendaries that are pretty important, like the Phantasmal Footsteps in Prism, but most heroes will be fine without the expensive stuff. And as the card pool continues to grow, we are getting legendaries that drive down the prices of other ones. And those staple cards? Well, if you come from Yu-Gi-Oh!, then you should be used to expensive generic staples. And while I'm absolutely not defending the prices of these cards, I do want to point out that the 3 big staples came out in the first 2 sets. Those 2 sets had very low Majestic pull rates, and even though they have seen reprints in History Pack 1, there wasn't a whole lot of that set printed, as it was mostly just a way for LSS to print cards in different languages. So I'm sure that as the card pool grows and we see more reprints, the prices of these cards will come down. And thankfully, we haven't seen any crazy expensive main deck staples since these 3. And the best part is, you don't even really need these cards. I mean, if you're going to big competitive events, obviously you're going to want to play the best cards, but if you're just going to your locals, you'll be fine. I've been playing this game since March of 2021, and I only about a month ago finally got my full playsets for these 3 staple cards. And the same goes for the Fabled cards. These cards are incredibly rare and hard to pull. but they aren't staples because all of them have incredible downsides like not being able to block with them. Luckily at the moment, we only have one deck that must play a Fabled, that being the Eye of Ophidia in a Kano deck. However, again, unless you're going to a major competitive event, Kano is still Kano whether it has Eye or not. So at the moment, Fableds aren't really a problem at all, although they may become one down the line, maybe resulting in bans, so just be aware of that. Thankfully though, the sealed product you can buy is very cheap for this game. Blitz decks are $10 to $15, Classic Battles is $40 to $50, and sealed boxes are about $80 to $120 depending on where you live in the world. In fact, I'm just gonna say it now. If you buy Magic the Gathering sealed product, you absolutely can afford to play Flesh and Blood. And that leads me, finally, to the longevity and the community around this game. If you're someone who gets really into trading card games and wants to play Flesh and Blood competitively, or you're more casual but you want to play it for a long time, then you want to know that the game has staying power. Now, while I am not an omniscient god, I can say with firm confidence that Flesh and Blood is here to stay. In 2022 alone, there were almost 1 million recorded Flesh and Blood matches, over 42,000 events, and over $1 million in just the tournament prize money, not to mention all the large tournament promos that range from thousands to tens of thousands of dollars. Flesh and Blood is already an incredibly successful game, even with its small community, and there is no signs of slowing down. 2023 is going to be the second year of full competitive play, and LSS is sticking to that $1 million in prize support. So especially if you're a competitive trading card game player, do not sleep on Flesh and Blood. There is an absolute genuine incentive to getting good at this game, traveling, and competing. And even if you're not interested in going to the high levels of competitive play, most of those 42,000+ events were Armory events. And while Armories aren't super cutthroat, even they come with promos that you can win that are worth $20 to $50. And even if you just want to sit down and have some drinks and pizza with your friends, you can play Ultimate Pit Fight, which is this game's multiplayer format, or better yet, sometime in 2023, we should be getting PvE. Now, we don't know a whole lot about it yet, but we are getting a lot of cards that are very clearly made for that style of format, and with the high quality of everything else in this game, I feel very confident that when it does release, it is going to be the pinnacle of casual play. Now, you might think that a game that appeals to so many different people would have a very awful community, but that couldn't be further from the truth. There is a top-down focus of the value of community from James White, the creator himself. Flesh and Blood, at least in my experience, has the least toxic community out there. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying you're not going to deal with assholes or shitty people, but it happens to a much lesser extent than you will find in other games. Flesh and Blood has faced a lot of hurdles in its 3 years of existence, especially with the pandemic and the TCG boom and bust of 2021. But even through those turbulent times, Flesh and Blood withstood the storm, standing upon its firm foundation of quality that will help ensure its success into the future. I firmly believe that, while far from perfect, Flesh and Blood is the greatest trading card game ever made. And trust me, you don't want to find out about the game but get into it a couple years later and regret your decision to not try it out earlier. Could have been me. Huge thank you to all of my supporters. If you'd like to join the Chad Army, you can either become a channel member or join my Patreon with the link in the description. And if it's cards you want, you can use my affiliate link to Red Riot Games to help support me as well.